Hello, very good evening to you. Welcome to ITV News and to Wednesday night's calendar.
Hello, thank you very much for your company. These are tonight's main stories.
Demanding answers. A report into the death of a 5-year-old boy in hospital reveals some of his care did not meet expected standards. His father just wants the truth.
I would never wish that on anyone. I was the first one to lift him when he was born, and I was the one that had to bury him with the same hands.
Prepare for takeoff. The Chancellor backs Doncaster's plans to reopen the runway in South Yorkshire. Those supporting it say it could transform the region.
When we get this airport reopened, it's not just about having the flights take off, it's everything that's going to come around it as well. It's all the businesses, investment and regeneration that comes along.
Powerless, the Yorkshire village on a short fuse after being plagued by outages, sometimes for hours on end. But has it finally been fixed?
And those clearer skies today leads to a great night for stargazers, but also a chilly one. All the detail a little later on.
Good evening. First tonight, the father of a 5-year-old boy from Sheffield who claims he heard hospital staff laughing in a nearby room as he prepared to switch off his son's life support machine has been told that some of the care he received didn't meet expected standards. Ian Haroon died 8 days after being admitted to Sheffield Children's Hospital with breathing problems in March 2023.
His family submitted a formal complaint soon after, and while a draft independent report into what happened has upheld many of their grievances, it also found changes to his care were unlikely to have prevented his death. Well, today his father is calling for a fresh investigation. He's been speaking to Jonathan Brown.
He was the soul and life of this family, and the fact he's not here, that joy and happiness that we all had with him around us was taken away from us.
It's been almost 2 years since Haroon's 5-year-old son was admitted to hospital with breathing problems and never came home. Instead, Ayan's condition worsened. He died 8 days later after a virus took hold, a time in which his father says his pleas to have fluid drained from his lungs were dismissed by clinicians.
It felt like I was letting my son down by not getting him the care that he needed, but no one wanted to listen. I would never wish that on anyone. I was the first one to lift him when he was born, and I was the one that had to bury him with the same hands.
Ayan, who had a rare developmental disorder, was cared for at Sheffield Children's Hospital throughout his life. Now, almost 2 years on from his death, the draft report from an independent investigation has fully upheld 307 of more than 700 complaints made by Ayan's family. It found that at times children's ICU staffing fell below optimum levels and workload there impacted on the overall quality of care. It also found that the family had received poor bereavement care. But it did conclude changes were unlikely to have prevented Ayan's death.
It states in the report that moving him to a single room was delayed, suction was delayed, moving him onto high flow was delayed, moving him to ICU was delayed. So what kind of level of incompetence was my son subjected to? I will not stop fighting for justice for Ayan, because Ayan would still be alive today if he had not been treated as a burden like the staff at the hospital treated him as, by denying him the life-saving treatment that he needed.
In a statement, the trust running Sheffield Children's Hospital said, "We have addressed a number of concerns from Ayan's family and we are committed to working with the family to address the learning within the draft report." While NHS South Yorkshire added, "We would again like to offer our sincere condolences to Ayan's family for the loss and distress they have experienced. We're continuing to work very closely." Haroon, meanwhile, has 8 weeks to respond to the draft report's findings, though he says he won't stop voicing concerns until he's given the assurances he needs that others won't follow in Ayan's footsteps. Jonathan Brown, ITV News, Sheffield.
And that's a story we'll continue to follow here on Calendar. The government threw its weight behind reopening Doncaster Sheffield Airport today as the Chancellor promised it would work with the city's council to recreate a thriving regional airport.
Rachel Reeves made the pledge as she announced plans for a third runway at Heathrow Airport. But 145 miles north, the news has been welcomed more than 2 years after the last flight out of South Yorkshire.
Emma Haywood is near the airport tonight and has been following the story. Emma's in Doncaster.
Well, I think people are much more optimistic tonight about the chance of this place reopening than they were just a few months ago. You know, the airport doesn't look that different than how it did back in November 22 when that last commercial flight landed. We're at the back, but if you go to the front of the airport, the big sign saying Doncaster Airport remains. The airport just looks empty, but the infrastructure is still there. And today, Rachel Reeves said she wanted to back the reopening of it.
So I can announce today that we will work with Doncaster Council and the Mayor of South Yorkshire, Oliver Coppard, to support their efforts to recreate South Yorkshire Airport City as a thriving regional airport.
Well, of course, that news has been welcomed by those who never wanted the airport to close in the first place and those who've been backing it reopening. And that, of course, includes Doncaster Council and South Yorkshire's Mayor Oliver Coppard.
So now what we have is a world-class operator on hand. We've got the government behind us with all their different opportunities as well in terms of working with the DFT, the Department for Transport, working with Ed Miliband's department on things like sustainable aviation, working with the MOD and what they need through their defence contracts. And we can open up all those conversations, hopefully to make sure that this whole project works.
Of course, at the heart of this campaign to get this place reopened is the economic value that it would bring. And that's not just about the hundreds of jobs that it would create and support. It's about the message that it sends out about the connectivity of this part of South Yorkshire.
The government is backing regional airports and it's backing places in the north like Doncaster, and I'm really pleased to hear those words today because it will give us a business confidence as well that we need, because when we get this airport reopened it's not just about having the flights take off, it's everything that's going to come around it as well. It's all the businesses, investment and regeneration that comes along.
Well, I think some people might be asking tonight, when can I book a flight from here? Well, we simply don't know the answer to that yet. There are many hoops to jump through, but we're expecting a decision about the airport sometime in the summer, and there are hopes that flights could resume from here in 2026.
Emma, thank you.
Still to come on the programme, calls grow for the heart screening of amateur sportsmen and women, as experts say it'll save lives.
And it almost felt like spring today, certainly looked almost like spring. Are we having the blue skies tomorrow? I'll have your forecast for the rest of the week, as always, a little later on.
More news now, and prosecutions brought by rail companies for alleged fare evasion have been quashed. More of them have been quashed today at a hearing in London. Last year, Calendar revealed the injustice of a complex system which allowed train companies to take out private prosecutions. Complainants said some travel rules were unclear and mitigating circumstances weren't taken into account. More than 350 Northern cases and 180 Transpennine Express cases were overturned at Westminster Magistrates Court this morning.
Residents of two housing estates in Eggborough say that they are fed up of being passed from pillar to post as they try to deal with repeated power cuts.
The homeowners say they've had at least 7 outages since the beginning of the month, and always without warning or explanation. Their provider says the small local network gets electricity from Northern Power Grid and blamed a fault with their network for the problems. Emma Wilkinson has more.
As a working mum with a toddler, Ashley has a lot to juggle. She also works from home, so repeatedly being left in the cold and dark in recent weeks without any explanation has been stressful.
I just cried, like, what else can you do? And that had happened twice in one day.
She says she and many of her neighbours have had at least 8 power cuts since December. Most have been since a generator was brought to the estate a couple of weeks ago without explanation. That generator was taken away yesterday, again, Ashley says, without any information as to why.
Monday I had to ring them and my daughter was screaming hysterically in the background because it was dark and we had to make her milk in the dark with no power. And the woman on the phone said, oh yeah, I can hear her in the background. And yeah, you can, because she's here with me every time it's happening. And every time it's happening, she's the one that's being affected by it. I shouldn't have to be thinking about whether or not I'm going to be able to keep my daughter warm, whether I'm going to be able to feed her.
And Ashley says the stress has been compounded by being repeatedly passed back and forth between their provider, ESP Utilities, and Northern Power Grid.
You expect to be able to contact your utilities provider and they'll be able to help you and give you an answer. They don't seem to know what's happening. You know, we pay enough money to these people, they just don't seem to care.
And each time the power is lost, Thomas loses money. He teaches music from home.
When the power goes off, I have to text all my students saying, look, we're going to have to cancel tonight, because you just don't know when it's going to come back on. You ring up the power companies and they don't give you any information. So I'm then bouncing around like a tennis ball between two different energy companies. Northern Power Grid say they don't recognise my postcode, and then they say go back to ESP. You're just bouncing around between the two of them.
In a statement, ESP told us the problems were caused by an underground cable fault on Northern Power Grid's network. ESP said it had been in regular contact with Northern Power Grid about this issue and said that to address the fault in the short term, it understands that Northern Power Grid had put a generator in place. Sadly, it said that appears to have caused further problems, but it said it was advised yesterday by Northern Power Grid that the cable has now been fixed and that that fix should be permanent.
That's the first time I've heard that response from yourself. They haven't told us anything. So I think it's pretty shocking of them to come out with that statement when actually they haven't informed any of the customers.
The local MP has arranged a meeting with Northern Power Grid so residents can speak to them directly. But they say their experience so far has given them little hope that the power will remain on or that they'll get compensation. Emma Wilkinson, ITV News, Eggborough.
A 56-year-old man has been arrested after the memorials of two murdered Leeds police officers were vandalised. On Saturday evening, black paint was sprayed on a memorial to PC Ian Broadhurst. He was 34 when he was shot in 2003. A memorial to Sergeant John Speed, who was shot when going to help a colleague in 1984, was also targeted.
A wildlife sanctuary in North Yorkshire has stopped taking in seabirds after an outbreak of bird flu in the county.
Whitby Wildlife Sanctuary had to cull hundreds of birds following an outbreak 3 years ago and says it's doing everything that it can to prevent another outbreak hitting it again. Jenny Henry reports.
So we've just got to dip our feet. So in this enclosure we've got our waterfowl.
This is a sanctuary, but it's now become a safe haven for birds in more ways than one, protecting them from the spread of avian flu.
It's a worry, it's a frustration as well. We take in around 3,000 rescues a year. So when there's a housing order in place, we suddenly have to halt a lot of the work that we do. And that involves helping members of the public when they have an injured bird. It's the bringing in of new casualties that we just cannot do at the moment.
So to come into the sanctuary today, we've had to dip our shoes into DEFRA approved disinfectant, and the volunteers who handle birds here will have to use PPE like this for the foreseeable, so things like masks, gloves, aprons, foot wraps and hand gel, and that's all to prevent any sort of traces of the disease coming in. Now, bird keepers really do have to take this seriously, and it was only a few years ago that the worst happened here.
We did have active cases on site, so we've seen firsthand what the disease can do and what effect that had on us, which was a complete site closure.
And that involves a cull, doesn't it? And, you know, just how heartbreaking is it to go through a cull like that?
I would never want to go through something like that again. It was extremely high levels of stress and upset for our entire volunteer team and members of the public as well, because they know that the patients that they've sent to us, you know, were sadly culled a few years ago. That was a very, very dark time for us here, and I definitely wouldn't want to live through that again.
The housing order began on Monday after confirmed cases at 2 sites near York. It means that anyone that keeps birds must keep them enclosed until it's lifted.
We're really concerned about bird flu because it does have the potential to spread to people, and because there's a chance in the future that bird flu could combine with a human influenza and create the next pandemic. So it's something that we take very swift action when we see it.
No one knows how long this housing order will stay in place. It could be weeks or months before the sanctuary here can accept any more birds into its care. For the time being, they're doing what they can to help these injured birds have a full life ahead. Jenny Henry, ITV News.
Oh, well, let's hope that it all works out for them. The ITV Evening News continues at 6:30. Here's a look at what's happening with Mary Nightingale.
Coming up in the programme, growth will not come without a fight. The Chancellor spells out her plans to unlock economic growth, which include backing a third runway at Heathrow. We uncover how so-called Instagram injectors are advertising Botox online illegally. And we speak to the Bridget Jones actor Renée Zellweger on her new release. Join me for all those stories and more at 6:30.
Thanks, Mary. See you shortly. Now then, some football from last night now, and Rotherham United were our only winners in League One. The Millers fell behind at home to Cambridge, but responded with this equaliser from Malik Wilkes before Hakeem Oddafin struck the winner. Meanwhile, in League Two, Bradford City moved into the automatic promotion places following a 1-0 win over Morecambe, and Chesterfield beat Bromley 3-0 with the pick of the goal scored by Armando Dobra.
Well, staying with sport, there are calls for those taking part here in the Calendar region to be screened for heart conditions.
Yes, a campaign to introduce screenings in grassroots sports is gathering momentum, with discussions this week involving cardiologists and representatives from various sports bodies, including the England and Wales Cricket Board and the Rugby Football Union. Lauren Hall reports.
If these netballers were playing in Italy rather than Scunthorpe, they'd have been screened for heart conditions. It's something all Italian athletes go through, whether professional or amateur. Here they'd welcome it with open arms.
I think I had one last year and it helped because I knew that I was fine, so I can carry on doing the sport I love.
When they're competing and they're working at a full tempo, you need to know if there's any issues, and more safety checks we can make the better.
1 in 300 young people have a potentially life-threatening heart condition, and every week in the UK, 12 will die from one without ever knowing they'd had it. Those with underlying heart conditions are more at risk if they do sport and exercise. That's what happened to Clarissa Nichols, a keen athlete who died days before her 21st birthday. Her mum's now leading the campaign for screenings in grassroots sports.
I'm fighting for this because I see so much good, and I do not want any more other families to go through these tragedies. And if I can save even one family from going through this tragedy, then what's happened to Clarissa has some meaning.
The campaign looks to Italy, where heart screenings have been part of all competitive sport for over 40 years. A similar approach here would have its challenges in terms of costs and resources, but this cardiologist says it would save lives.
We have the potential to pick up, to find early a cardiac disease that may cause sudden cardiac death, and therefore we will be able to prevent sudden cardiac death.
The charity Cardiac Risk in the Young runs screenings like this across the UK, but it can't keep up with demand.
We've got over 100,000 people on a waiting list to be screened, and we're doing the best we can to offer those people the opportunity to have their heart tested. But it's not possible for us as a charity, relying on local fundraisers, money raised, to be able to offer this service.
A sports screening programme could change that, but the charity wants to go even further. It says we should be screening all young people if we want a truly level playing field. Lauren Hall, ITV News.
And just to let you know, we have been in touch with the Department of Health and Social Care, who say their thoughts are with Clarissa's family and that calls for a screening programme are currently under review.
Yes, well, it's time now to head to Kerry. Kez, I was caught out this morning. Beautiful blue sky, thought it was nice and warm, and set off without my gloves on.
Yeah, cold but clear. Great news tonight if anyone is stargazing. I mean, I've been trying to sort of give you top tips over the last couple of weeks of, you know, really dry, clear conditions at night. And tonight is probably the night, especially into the early hours, if you are keen on, you know, just getting up in the middle of the night and taking photographs. Not me, I like to be under the duvet. But yeah, it's been gorgeous, hasn't it? That blue sky just felt like spring, made us feel great.
Beautiful.
We've got some footage very kindly sent in to us by one of our camera operators, Richard, of Scamondon Reservoir, which of course is right over the tops of the West Yorkshire Pennines. There's a little bit of cirrusy high-level cloud there, but not producing anything in the way of rain. Moody start there. And the water levels are quite high. We would expect them to be between, I think, 85 and 98% at this time of the year. We're in the middle of winter, but of course we have had a lot of rain. I think we've had pretty much near 100% of rainfall so far this month. And of course, by the end of the week and into next week, I'll be giving you all the deets on that. But oh my goodness, it was so good. Whether you were urban, this was in York at lunchtime, absolutely gorgeous from the Lendal Bridge.
Yeah, you see, that's where I was this morning, walking the dog.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, lucky you. I'm very
though.
jealous. Absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, it's worth it though, isn't it? And this was a little bit breezier and probably felt a little bit colder right over the tops in Burnsall. A big thank you to Sharon. And first thing this morning, check this out, a heron in flight at Filey. A big thank you to Trish for getting up and taking that shot. And this is a song thrush from Cabbage Hill in Leeds. A big thank you to Andy. I'm like, is it Andy? He stayed until after sunrise and took a slightly closer shot. So there you go. So it's going to be chilly overnight tonight, but we're getting some more sunshine tomorrow.
Yeah. Good.
And then it might snow.
Do we need gloves tomorrow?
Yeah, you'll need gloves tomorrow.
Right.
Just a heads up, it is winter, of course. We've got a weather front coming through tomorrow night into the early part of Friday. Might get a tiny bit of snow cover right over the tops, but it's fleeting. It's more of an ice issue. And of course, here is your forecast for the next few days.
Today's forecast: seafood and sugar cube towns. TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.
Yes, we did okay today. For most of us, dry and bright. This was Scarborough first thing this morning, and again at lunchtime, sticking with the blue sky and some pretty impressive reflections. Into the afternoon though, Scarborough a little bit more cloud coming in off the North Sea, all associated with an area of low pressure that is staying there. We actually look to the southwest for high pressure building. This front will come through early Friday and tend to fizzle out, and the high to the southeast as we head into the weekend will keep these systems at bay at least until the second half on Sunday. In the meantime, overnight tonight, clouds sink southwards, skies become increasingly clear from the north as we head into the early hours, and that allows for a pretty widespread frost with temperatures, towns and cities hovering around freezing, but a few degrees below that in rural shelter spots as we head towards dawn. So expecting a frosty start as we head into Thursday. 7:57 and 4:43 are your sun times as we head into tomorrow. The blue on the chart indicating a frosty start for many first thing. Always the risk of a little bit of cloud over the Pennines with a very small chance of a shower tomorrow, but otherwise it's dry with long sunny spells, temperatures on the chilly side and just a little bit of a breeze pushing on to the higher grounds in the west as we head into the afternoon. But under the clearer skies, that cold start on Thursday evening, then that weather front pushing its way quite readily south and eastwards as we head into the early part of Friday. Unfortunately, looks like the clearer skies are staying to the west for much of daylight hours, but this front stays to the west until Sunday, so the weekend rather cloudy but drier on Saturday.
TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.
You mentioned that little heron there. We've got a heron that visits our garden.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, they're so
beautiful.
majestic. I absolutely adore them, yeah.
Amazing creatures.
Never seen one in flight, though. That's pretty impressive.
There we go.
There you
Lovely.
go. Follow that.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you very much for watching. Arif is back at 10:30 and Mary's next. Bye-bye.
Very good night. Bye-bye.